Welcome, everyone. You're listening to Make Planning Make Sense. My name is Aaron Zimmerman, and I'm a director at Centro Planning Consultancy.
And I'm Alex Roth, a planner at Centro Planning Consultancy, and we'll be your hosts.
In today's episode, we're going to introduce ourselves, talk a bit about why we're making the podcast, and tell you what you can look forward to in the weeks ahead.
Please send us your comments and questions to podcast@centroplan.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you.
Very excited.
Shall we dive in, Aaron?
Let's.
Oh my God, another podcast. Are you joking?
I know.
Crazy. Who is making this podcast? Who are we?
I'd like to start with an apology to everybody listening. Actually, let's start with some introductions.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
So my academic background actually is in political science. I got my bachelor's and my first master's in comparative politics at the American University in DC. After uni, I did contracted consulting for the Food and Drug Administration. Shout out to the Office of Policy. Absolutely brilliant team. I learned a lot about public health, and there was just so much passion and heart in the public interest in that office. But to be honest, public health just wasn't my personal passion. That was always really related to the built environment, to townscape, to all of these quality of life indicators that are actually determined by where we are and what that place is like. So I returned to university to get my master's at the University of Glasgow in city and regional planning. Joined a consultancy in London thereafter, and then joined Centro in 2020. Alex, can you tell us a bit about how you joined Centro?
So the way I joined Centro is I was doing my master's in urban planning at the LSE. And Aaron, you had actually come in to do a guest lecture. And we had been asked as part of our coursework at the time to make some recommendations to the incoming government about the NDMPs and whether they would put us on track to delivering 1.5 million new homes. And when Aaron came in to do his lecture, I thought, wow, this guy is literally at the front lines of getting development through the planning system.
Flatterer.
If I want to figure out what's working and what's not, I better go work for him.
That is very kind. By the way, Dr. Holman, Dr. Mace, we'd love to have you on the podcast. Get in touch.
I think what might be even more front and center on our listeners' mind than why are two planning agents making a podcast is
the accent in the room.
Well, yeah, what are us two Americans doing mouthing off about the British planning system?
Mouthing right off. Well, I am American. I am also a naturalized British citizen as of last year.
That's right. I am not just American. In fact, I'm not even American at all. I'm originally from Austria, and I grew up in the United Arab Emirates, and I lived in America for a number of years. I lived in New York and studied there. And I was previously working in Berlin for an NGO working on capacity building and political leadership. And I came to the UK to do my master's in urban planning. And I've been working as a planner here ever since.
Yes. So if anybody does start listening to this and think, oh, they're not going to know what they're talking about, please hold your questions till the end. Right. Let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
What even is town planning?
Aaron, what is urban planning?
You know, if I'm talking to like a friend of a friend at an event or whatever, and I tell them I'm a town planner,
right,
almost invariably the next response is, oh, like, so what towns have you planned? And it's like without fail. But town planning in the UK at its core is really a regulatory system that grants or refuses permission to develop land. And the system considers how land should be used or should not be used. It considers the aesthetics of the proposed development. For residential development, it considers the affordable housing cross subsidy. It considers the relationship of a proposed development to nearby land uses. So that's like everything from the effects of abattoir runoff to noise coming from an air source heat pump to the squeals of children on a proposed playground. It also considers the quality of the user experience, everything from accessibility to natural light to outlook to whether the cycle parking area is convenient enough to incentivize cycling. And it also considers big picture externalities like the carbon emissions from the use of a site, the carbon emissions from the production of the concrete that will be used to carry out the development, the air quality of the area, the air quality impacts of the development, I think that one would be hard-pressed to say that the UK town planning system is not comprehensive in its considerations.
Yeah, and I guess those considerations would apply in a lot of different national contexts and a lot of different planning systems. In this podcast, we'll be focusing primarily on the UK town and country planning system and on our perspective as agents. But in addition to being a regulatory system, Aaron, I would also say that planning is a practice. Whether you want to call it an art, a science, or a trade, that's up for debate. But it's a practice of setting the objectives that we want to achieve out of development and the built environment through local plan making. It's the practice of trying to achieve those objectives through policies, and it's the application of those policies. I think there's a perception out there that buildings are the result of one designer, and the reality is that the built environment is not only a team effort, but it's the product of an entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. You know, the MRTPI used to call planning the mediation of space and the making of place.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I say used to, I don't think they do it anymore.
I think that has a ring to it for sure.
It's excellent branding, right? You read that and you're like, this is important. This is big.
But how much does that really tell you? I have to be honest. How much does that really tell you about our planning system?
Yeah, it's super poetic if you understand what planning is already. I don't think mediation is quite the right word, because the mediation isn't really between spaces. It's between the applicant and the decision maker.
Kind of leaves out the actors involved, doesn't it?
I think so. And to me, you know, the term placemaking lacks a humility, right? So first of all, if we're talking about who makes places in the physical sense, it's architects, landscape architects, construction contractors, working with developers' land and money. Planners negotiate and secure or grant permission to allow other people to make places, if we're talking about the physical sense. Placemaking as a compound noun, though, is really more about the quality of the lived experience. And I think that it lacks a humility to say that a regulatory system makes places. And I think that it misses the human element, even if we say that construction contractors and architects and landscape architects make places. Planning is a facilitator to result in the physical places that then can be place-made, if we're going to verbify it, by the people who are actually using it.
So we're talking about the people behind the making of places, Aaron. So I would say we are one of said people. In fact, we are planning agents. So what is a planning agent? What is our job?
Yeah, I try to explain it like this. A planning consultancy is like a law firm in its structure, but we're not practicing law. We have clients, we advise them on strategy and risk, we act on their behalves, and we work to advance their interests, which in many cases is getting planning permission for development. So it's technical, it's persuasive, it's interpersonal, it's spatial, and it's sometimes contentious. Now, planning agents are just one type of town planner. Planning officers at a local planning authority and policymakers at the local and national level would also be town planners. So yeah, I mean, I think it's also worth mentioning that the planning agent is not a professional position that exists in most developed economies. My job as a planning agent wouldn't, or maybe potentially shouldn't, need to exist if it weren't for the system that we have. But as long as we have the system that we have, and my position does need to exist, I'm glad that I'm doing it. Which does, I guess, beg the question, okay, so like, why does it need to exist, right? And it really does, I promise you.
Yeah, Aaron, it has a lot to do with the way that the planning workforce is spread across our planning system in this unique national context. I mentioned earlier that planning is a practice involving, 1, setting objectives for the built environment, and 2, figuring out how to make those objectives happen through policy. Well, there's actually a third tranche of work in our planning system, which is to figure out how that policy is to actually be applied in context and make sure that development actually comes forward in accordance with that policy. And that's where planning agents come in, along with planning officers at the local authority. And it's interesting how the planning workforce has shifted across these tranches over the years. Of course, you always had planners at local authorities working on both development plans and proposals. But in the private sector, in the 1970s, for example, most private sector planning consultants worked on things like master planning or housing need studies. And it wasn't a given that you'd need a planning agent to prepare and submit your planning application. You could have your architect or the developer sometimes take on the preparation and submission of those planning applications. And today we see planning consultants on almost every major development.
I'd be surprised to find a development team for a major development that didn't have a planning agent on board.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way you're describing it, the professional assessment of an application against the development plan
Has become more complicated.
Yeah. And the solution in the mid to late 20th century was to try to front load some of that assessment into the private sector before the application was submitted. So then through the collaborative process of planning advice from the conception of a project, when you get to the application stage, all of that work has kind of been ironed out.
That's right.
And that's what we say in our planning statements, right? We are giving a professional assessment of the application and explaining the different interplays between policies, the different trade-offs because of material considerations in the site-specific context.
That's right.
And then the decision maker can receive the whole application and in 8 or 13 weeks say, yeah, that's fine. I've checked with everyone and they agree it's fine too. I think
that's right.
Through a different lens, the discretionary system has evolved to become a negotiation-based system, right? That smoothing out of the wave has actually become a wave that's crashed back on itself. And we're now seen as kind of like the opposition sometimes to the planning officers, but we're very much designed to be their collaborative counterpart.
Yeah, I think we're designed to fill in for part of that resourcing gap or that need for more resourcing as planning has gotten more complex. And I think it's worth it just to briefly mention, Aaron, that this isn't just true of us as a consulting profession, but for a number of other technical consultants that have now moved into planning as well. I have something, I think you're going to chuckle at this. I have in front of me a covering letter for a planning application, actually, of the redevelopment of the Harrods depository in Westminster. And this
Harrods what?
The old depository they used to use to sort of it's
I saw a documentary on that as a kid on like the Discovery Channel.
Did you?
Under London streets there's and then they have stories about the crazy stuff that's been stored there and all of the security features and stuff.
I am not exactly sure what it was originally used for, but these were a couple of buildings in Harrods ownership, and this is a covering letter from 2000, Aaron. And I think there's something that you're going to notice right away, which is the list of submission documents includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points.
Yeah,
for the demolition of 2 buildings and the erection of 2 buildings, and I don't know how many residential units. But can you imagine what that list of submission documents would look like in a covering letter for a planning application today?
Yeah.
How many bullet points would we have today?
I also noticed that everything is explained in the covering letter to have been printed 6 times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's stamped.
And honestly, if there were only that many documents necessary, I will print them as many times as necessary. I don't mind.
Yeah.
So we've saved a lot on paper as the planning system evolves, but we might not have saved on iterative or duplicative labor.
No. And just for context, Aaron, for the demolition of 2 buildings and the construction of, let's say, 76 residential units, how many submission documents do you think we'd require today?
I don't know. The number's going to be high enough to hurt me.
Oh, gosh. My guess is 23.
Yeah, probably about that.
Well, yeah.
But you're all going to have to split the DAS into 8 pieces to upload it to the planning portal. So.
Right. Exactly.
So just to say, the planning system is a discretionary system. When you start with the mindset that you want to just look at everything, you can put anything into that planning balance. And the system is now at a point where it is complex to the degree that a planning agent is absolutely essential. And a good planning agent, cough, cough, is fundamental to giving an application the best chance of success. I think that sometimes clients think, well, I'll just do what's asked of me and then I'll submit the application and that'll be fine. But the decision-making balance has become so multidimensional that careful policy assessment and careful strategy setting is really, really fundamental.
Yeah. And Aaron, how do we give an application the best chance of success? Not giving away any trade secrets here.
Yeah. I mean, in line with the original design of what a planning agent is meant to do, we start adding value at the very conception of a project. at the feasibility stage and throughout the entire process, through to getting a planning permission, through to the discharge of conditions. We are advising developers and their teams to provide certainty, to reduce program delays, to reduce policy conflict, and then ultimately to craft a narrative in the planning statement that is grounded in our professional judgment.
Yeah. And I think where we really try to go above and beyond here at Centro is to really understand the client's objectives from the beginning and offer a tailored and bespoke approach where we think proactively and work proactively through all stages, from the early feasibility, the design stage, all the way through to the determination stage, to work proactively with the client to really try to help achieve those objectives.
This programming is made possible by Centro Planning Consultancy. We will be right back. Let's talk about why we're making the podcast. And jokes aside, one of our goals is definitely to help people in our ecosystem understand planning more clearly. Now, the more you know about planning, the more it's evident that it's kind of messy and unpredictable and sometimes contentious, which is why our expertise as planning agents is really indispensable in getting anything to happen. But I do just want to say, we don't want the podcast to be like how planners write. We're very, very familiar with the long email and the technical balancing exercises and the case law citations and everything else. But if we wanted this podcast to be like how we write, like how we have to write for our work, then
people would fall asleep.
Yeah.
Our listeners would fall asleep. Although you're welcome to check out our planning statements on a planning register near you.
Right to us. We'll send you a few favorites.
Yeah.
So this is about increasing the accessibility of planning as a profession. And we hope that other people in our professional ecosystem are going to find it helpful.
So there's plenty of other people contributing to the public discourse right now. There's policymakers and lawyers and people in government, politicians, and a lot of people are contributing to this public discourse about planning right now. What's the benefit of having planning agents contribute to this conversation?
Well, it kind of does relate to the fact that we don't want the podcast to be like how we write, because when we write, we're always starting with, on behalf of the applicant, on behalf of our client, and we're speaking to advance their interests and to bring forward development. We want this podcast to be a voice, though, for us, really, for the practitioners in the public discourse. And the public discourse right now is dominated, in our view, by voices in national government, local government, think tanks, trade groups. And that's not bad, but I do think it's incomplete.
So what can planning agents bring to the conversation that perhaps others aren't bringing to it right now?
Yeah, I think that there can be a disconnect between the conversations about planning reform, which can exist at kind of a theoretical level, and the reality of why good development doesn't always get through the planning system. Right now, of course, the government is making a lot of proposed changes to planning, and sometimes we're sort of scratching our heads thinking, okay, that's fine. It won't do any harm, but will it really kind of speak to making a meaningful difference? And so we want the podcast to be a forum for ideas that would actually produce outcomes aligned with our values. And we want those conversations to be grounded in the day-to-day professional experience of practitioners in the industry. Because look, we are here to advance our clients' interests and bring forward sustainable development. And in that sense, our clients' interests and the public interests align. But as planners, we do have this duty to shape a built environment that meets the needs of our society. And right now, the planning system as we have it isn't really getting us there.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with the contribution of practitioners to wider sort of strategic conversations, because it's one thing to discuss the design of a system at a strategic level, but then it's another to see how is that system implemented in practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's where the input of practitioners is really crucial to ensuring that the system works as intended, or if it doesn't work as intended, what can we do to fix it?
So that brings us to a couple of disclaimers that I think that we need to make for this episode and really all episodes going forward. The first is, don't confuse a podcast with professional advice.
Dear listeners, please don't make business decisions based on a podcast.
Come on, we shouldn't have to say it, but of course we are very happy to give professional advice for money. Get in touch. So The second disclaimer is really more like a reassurance that this podcast is not out to identify the goodies and the baddies in the planning and development ecosystem. And there are incredibly deliberate and sincere people working in trade organizations, in academia, in local government, and people working in national government who are all trying to answer these broad and fairly well-established questions about how things can go better. There are some incredible dysfunctions, and I think that it's important that we're able to talk about them on this podcast. But when we talk about those dysfunctions, it's really about these structural issues that are fundamentally challenging, where we add value and where planning reform could potentially head. The last one is the typical, we are not speaking for Centro as a corporate entity, and this is a way to cover our asses, yes, but really it's because you need to be able to trust us that we're speaking candidly based on our experiences. For the same reasons, we want our guests to feel comfortable speaking candidly, so this disclaimer applies to guests of the podcast as well. So don't at me. Actually, please do, because there's no such thing as bad press. Would love to hear from you.
That's a wrap.
Join us next week for an overview of how we got to the planning system that we have today, that we will try to make as interesting as possible.
Send us your questions and comments to podcast@centroplan.co.uk. Thank you for listening. I'm Alex.
And I'm Aaron.
See you next week.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch, then we'd love to hear from you. Please write to us at podcast@centroplan.co.uk. Make Planning Make Sense is presented by Centro Planning Consultancy and recorded in beautiful London, England. Its executive producer is me, Aaron Zimmerman. Additional production by my colleague and co-host Alex Roth. Marketing and promotion by our colleague Reese Raymond. Graphic design by our colleague Mariam Malaxi. Music by Joseph McDade. From all of us here at Centro, thank you so much for listening.